Okay, so I want you to picture something. Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning, you check your banking app, and there's a deposit, a fresh deposit of exactly 1,440 units of currency.
I mean, that is definitely not a bad way to start the day.
Right, it's the dream. But there's a catch here. The bank has some incredibly strict, honestly kind of terrifying rules. You cannot transfer this balance to a savings account. You can't invest it for next week. And the kicker...
Use it or lose it.
Exactly. If you don't spend every single unit by midnight, the bank just deletes it. Gone forever.
No rollover minutes. It's the ultimate depreciating asset class. And, for anyone who hasn't guessed it yet, we are talking about the 24-hour bank. That currency is minutes.
It's a haunting metaphor.
Yeah.
1,440 minutes. We all get the exact same deposit. But today on the deep dive, we're tackling the question that I think really keeps most of us up at night.
Which is why we feel so broke.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we're living in this era of high-speed internet and AI and instant grocery delivery, why does it feel like we actually have less time that our great-grandparents did?
It is the defining paradox of the modern age. We have these incredible tools, but somehow less time. And to really unpack this, we're diving into Hamilton Armour's book, The Great Time Delusion.
And what I found so fascinating about this source material is that Armour isn't just starting from scratch. He's actually updating a classic text.
Right. From 1910, Arnold Bennett's How to Live on 24 Hours a Day.
Which is wild to me. You think of 1910, you think of this, slower, more deliberate pace of life.
Mm-hmm.
But Bennett was already stressing out about the clock back then.
He was, but Armour makes this really crucial distinction early on. He argues that while Bennett was worried about things like factory whistles and tram schedules, we are facing an entirely different beast today.
Right.
So we're essentially auditing this 1,440-minute fortune to figure out exactly where the leaks are. And Armour identifies the first massive leak right in the prologue. He calls it the invisible enemy.
Or, to use the academic term that sounds a bit like a spy thriller, shadow work.
Shadow work.
Exactly. Now, I've heard this term thrown around online. Usually, it's people complaining about having to use self-checkout lanes at the grocery store. Is that what we're talking about here?
It is, but it goes so much deeper than just scanning your own produce. So the concept actually comes from the philosopher Ivan Illich, and it was updated for the digital age by Craig Lambert. Originally, shadow work referred to unpaid domestic labor.
Like scrubbing floors and doing laundry.
Right. But in our modern context, it's about how corporations and systems have successfully offloaded their administrative work directly onto you.
It really feels like the death of the service economy in a way.
Think about it. 20 years ago, if you wanted to book a complex vacation, you called a travel agent. They did the legwork. Today, you spend 3 hours on a Sunday staring at Expedia, comparing layovers and baggage fees.
Or banking. You used to have a bank teller. Now you are the teller. You're managing your own two-factor authentication and security protocols.
And you're your own IT department.
Oh, absolutely. I spent an hour yesterday just troubleshooting my router. That is literal labor.
Precisely. That is the shadow tax. It requires cognitive load, it burns actual calories, and it takes time. But because it doesn't come with a W-2 and it usually happens while you're sitting on your couch, we don't count it as work.
We just feel exhausted at 8 p.m. and wonder why we didn't have the energy to read a book.
Exactly. So we have this 1,440-minute fortune, but before we even start our actual day, the shadow tax has already skimmed right off the top.
Which leads us directly into chapter 1 of the book, The Efficiency Paradox. Because, let's be honest, the sales pitch for all this technology was that it was going to save us time.
Download this app, it saves you 5 minutes. Buy this software, it automates your workflow.
But Armour introduces this concept of technical friction. We tend to completely ignore the maintenance cost of the tools themselves.
We do, and the source material brings up some absolute disasters to prove this point. The CrowdStrike outage in July 2024 is a perfect example.
Oh, that was a massive wake-up call.
One faulty update. A tiny, tiny piece of code froze 8.5 million Windows devices globally.
The blue screen of death heard round the world.
Hospitals couldn't access records. Airlines grounded flights. Banking stopped. Armour calls this time debt. We accrued all this invisible debt by relying on these hyper-complex systems, and suddenly the bill came due. Millions of collective hours were just vaporized.
Because the tool that was supposed to automate security became the only thing anyone could work on. It reminds me of the Southwest Airlines meltdown from 2022, which Armour also highlights.
Yes.
It wasn't that they didn't have pilots or that they didn't have planes. It was that their scheduling software was so archaic it literally lost track of where the human beings were.
That is what Armour calls the daily miracle of time, just grinding to a complete halt. When the tool becomes the task, you're in deep trouble.
But it's not just about when things break, right? The more insidious issue is what happens when the technology works exactly as intended, maybe even too well.
Which brings us to the Jevons paradox.
Okay, break this down for us, because this is a 19th century economic theory about coal. How does coal explain my overflowing email inbox?
It's a great connection. So, William Stanley Jevons noticed that when steam engines became more efficient, meaning they used less coal to produce the same amount of power, we didn't actually use less coal overall.
Logic would dictate that we'd save the coal, we'd have a surplus.
But economics says otherwise. Because that energy became cheaper to produce, we found entirely new uses for it. We built more engines, we ended up burning way more coal.
The LED rebound effect is similar, right? Light bulbs got cheaper to run, so we just lit up more parking lots and buildings.
Exactly. And Armour applies this directly to the digital office with the paperless paradox. Computers made the transaction cost of creating a document basically zero.
So did we go paperless?
Of course not. We just print 20 drafts of a report that in the 1980s would have been typed out exactly once. We CC 50 people on an email thread that used to be a 5-minute phone call between two people.
Efficiency just increases consumption. That is the fundamental rule.
And the most painful statistic in the book regarding this is the doctor's dilemma.
Oh, I read this part twice because I honestly couldn't believe it.
It's brutal. For every 1 hour a physician spends face-to-face with a patient, they spend 2 hours on electronic health records and desk work.
2 hours of admin for 1 hour of healing. We basically turned highly trained medical professionals into data entry clerks.
In the name of efficiency, that is the ultimate shadow work. It's costing something like $4.6 billion in physician burnout, but more importantly, it's stealing the time that was meant for their core mission.
So if efficiency tools are actually just generating more work, we really need to categorize what work actually means today. Because in Chapter 2, Armour argues that not all mental exertion is created equal.
Right. We've been talking about shadow work, that reactive, low-value buzzing, managing notifications, troubleshooting. But he contrasts that with what he calls synthetic work.
Which sounds a bit like a sci-fi concept, but it's actually the goal here.
It is. The term originally comes from Rudolf Steiner. Synthetic work is constructive, internal labor. It's reading a book that is slightly too complex for you. It's deep meditation. It's the kind of work that builds mental stature.
It synthesizes disparate ideas into something entirely new. It makes your mind larger.
Exactly. But the problem is, our modern workplace setup is actively hostile to synthetic work. Armour does this work type audit that is pretty eye-opening.
It's basically a pick your poison scenario. If you work on site in a traditional office, you suffer from commute residue. You carry the traffic stress and the office politics through the front door of your house.
And if you're hybrid, working a few days at home and a few in the office, you have the blur problem. The constant mental exhaustion of recalibrating your environment every single day.
And if you're fully remote, I mean, that's supposed to be the dream, right? Total freedom.
Total freedom until you realize you're living on a digital leash. Because there are no physical boundaries anymore, the office is literally everywhere. Your kitchen table is the boardroom. This leads directly to workplace telepressure.
Telepressure. I genuinely feel attacked by that term.
We all do. It's that visceral urge to respond to a Slack message or an email within seconds. Not because the message is actually urgent, but because you need to perform your presence. You have to prove you're working.
And that constant vigilance just destroys your cognitive endurance. There's a statistic here about the legal profession that really drives this home. Lawyers are basically the masters of the billable hour. But on average, how many hours do they actually bill in a standard 8-hour day?
It's shockingly low, about 2.6 hours.
2.6 hours of actual legal work out of 8.
Because the rest of their day is swallowed by shadow work. They're acting as their own IT technicians for complex e-discovery tools. They're formatting documents. They're managing the endless stream of pings. Even the most highly paid professionals in the world are drowning in admin.
So naturally, we try to fix this. We look for productivity hacks. But Chapter 3 warns us that the cure is very often worse than the disease, which means we have to talk about Inbox Zero.
The myth of more time. Poor Merlin man.
He's the guy who coined Inbox Zero.
Right. Years ago, yes. And he originally meant it as a processing mindset. You look at the email, make a decision, and move on. It was supposed to be about flow.
But corporate culture warped it into a video game. The goal became keeping the folder completely empty at all costs.
It turned into a badge of corporate virtue. But Armour cites this fascinating study by Kushlev and Dunn that completely dismantles this idea. They found that people who check their email continuously, just to keep it at zero, experience significantly higher stress levels than people who just batch check their email a few times a day.
Even if the batch checkers had a fuller inbox.
Exactly. The empty inbox is actually a symptom of mental clutter, not clarity. It's the efficiency trap. You just become a highly efficient router of other people's priorities.
And along with that comes the collector's fallacy. This false belief that bookmarking articles or doing digital gardening is the same thing as actual learning.
It's hoarding. It's not knowledge acquisition.
Which brings us to my absolute favorite parable in the entire book, the Juicero machine.
The infamous $400 juice machine.
It was incredible. It had Wi-Fi, it had 400 custom parts, aerospace-grade aluminum. It exerted 4 tons of force.
And what did it do? It squeezed a pre-packaged bag of juice. A bag that a human being could just squeeze with their bare hands in about 10 seconds.
It is the ultimate metaphor for modern productivity culture.
It perfectly illustrates the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. Juicero was a marvel of efficiency, solving a problem that simply did not exist.
And we do that with our days. We build these incredibly complex Notion dashboards to track projects that maybe shouldn't even exist in the first place.
Which is why Armour suggests a truly counterintuitive solution: strategic incompetence.
Choose to be bad at things.
Yes, you cannot do more faster. You have to choose to drop the ball on things that don't matter.
Be the person who is notoriously slow to answer non-urgent emails. Be the person who just can't quite figure out how to format the weekly update memo.
You preserve your energy for the synthetic work.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem. We are leaking our time to shadow work, and our productivity hacks are just Juicero machines. Let's pivot to the solution. Chapter 4 is called the 16 hours.
The math here is very straightforward. You have 24 hours in the bank. You sleep for 8. You sell 8 hours to your employer. That leaves exactly 8 hours of unallocated equity.
Bennett referred to this as the day within a day.
And that requires a massive mindset shift. Most of us treat those 8 hours as residual time. It's just passive recovery so we can drag ourselves back to work the next morning.
But Bennett and Armour both argue that, no, that is your actual life.
Yeah.
The job is just the subsidiary funding mechanism for those specific 8 hours.
But you can hear the listener pushing back right now saying, I'm exhausted. After a full day of work, I just want to collapse on the couch.
Right. And Bennett anticipated that exact complaint way back in 1910. He argued that we aren't usually physically tired after work. We are mentally bored.
Our brains are stuck in these repetitive work loops. And passive recovery, like doom scrolling or binge-watching TV, is actually much less restorative than active detachment.
Doing something difficult actually rests the brain better than doing nothing.
It forces the brain to dump the cash. The book gives these incredible historical examples of the 3 pillars of protection. The first is a hard temporal firewall.
A fixed timestamp where your professional identity just shuts down.
And the second is the sacred appointment. Scheduling your leisure time with the exact same rigidity you would use for a specialist doctor's appointment.
And the third is that active detachment. Winston Churchill is a great example of this.
He was governing Britain during World War II, arguably one of the most stressful leadership roles in human history. And how did he detach? He laid bricks.
He literally built physical walls at his estate.
He built walls and he painted landscapes. He engaged in manual, creative, difficult labor to force his mind away from the war.
And the book mentions Marie Curie as well, treating her lab time as a sacred appointment.
She famously ignored the Nobel Prize ceremony because she didn't want it to interrupt her scheduled work in the lab. She built an absolute fortress around her time.
Then there's Maya Angelou. She used a hard temporal firewall. She would rent a basic hotel room to write in, and she would have the staff strip the walls bare. No decor, no paintings.
She completely removed all the visual cues of domestic shadow work so she could enter deep focus.
But, for the average listener, you can't just snap your fingers and go from a harassed employee checking Slack to Maya Angelou in a bare hotel room. You need a transition.
Which is exactly what Chapter 5 covers, the digital commute.
Because in the mechanical age, that train ride home was the buffer. It was the airlock between the factory and the family.
But today, the office is glowing in your pocket 24/7. So we have to consciously build a mental airlock. And Armour argues that this protocol actually has to start the very moment you wake up.
Because of the update trap?
If the first thing you do when you open your eyes is reach for your phone to check the news or your email, you have triggered digital submission.
You're inviting strangers, algorithms, and your boss to set the agenda for your brain before your feet have even touched the floor.
So to combat this, Armour lays out a specific morning protocol with 3 phases. Phase 1 is the analog buffer.
For the first 30 minutes of the day, absolute digital silence. No silicon. You read a physical book, you reflect, you just drink your coffee, keep the inputs analog.
Then phase 2 is strategic oversight. This is where you review your life architecture. You act as the CEO of your own soul before you clock in as someone else's employee.
And phase 3 is the controlled launch.
You log on with a specific intent. You know exactly what task you are executing, rather than just drifting into the digital stream and reacting to whatever pops up.
Toni Morrison had a beautiful version of this. She would watch the dawn every morning.
She called it the pre-secular light. She needed to inhabit that quiet space before the world became secular, before it became ordinary and full of demands. That light was her trigger to transition into her writing mind.
And on the flip side, for ending the workday, we have Ernest Hemingway.
The stopping when juicy technique. Hemingway would intentionally stop writing for the day right when he knew exactly what was going to happen next in the story.
So he never had to face a terrifying blank page the next morning.
He built his own on-ramp. It's a brilliant way to bypass that initial morning friction and procrastination.
The sources also talk about naval officers using what's called a tactical purge.
Stepping out onto the bridge wing of the ship just to look at the physical horizon. Grounding their brains away from the glowing radar screens and the touch screens. We all need to find a way to look at a physical horizon.
Okay, so we've established the schedule. We have the firewall and the commute. But Chapter 6 really drops the hammer here. It doesn't matter if you have the time, if you lack the concentration to actually use it.
The concentration core. We have successfully outsourced our memory to Google and our sense of direction to GPS. Armour compares the modern fragmented mind to a puppy in the park.
It just chases every single score, every notification. It has zero discipline.
So you have to train the puppy. And the book lists 3 specific exercises to rebuild your attention span. And the first one, the Bennett protocol, honestly sounds a bit ridiculous.
It really does. The directive is to take a mundane object, a kettle, a pencil, a cup, and just stare at it, focus completely on it for 10 straight minutes.
It sounds easy until you actually try it.
Just look at a kettle.
Focus on its shape, think about the materials, how it was manufactured, and when your mind inevitably wanders, and it will, probably within 10 seconds, you forcefully pull your attention back to the kettle.
It's basically a bicep curl for your brain.
Exactly. The novelist Gustave Flaubert actually made his protege, Guy de Maupassant, do this exact thing with a tree. He told him to look at that tree until he saw something that no one else had ever noticed. It builds cognitive persistence.
Then there's exercise 2, the deep reading sprint.
This is linear reading. No skimming, no jumping around, 20 solid minutes. And the key is, if you hit a word you don't know or a complex concept, you have to struggle with the context. You do not tab away to Google it.
This instantly reminded me of the Bill Gates Think Week concept mentioned in the text.
Gates would physically disconnect for a week just to read deeply through dense technical papers. That focused reading is how he predicted the massive shift in his famous Internet tidal wave memo back in 1995. He saw the connections because he was reading deeply.
And Armour contrasts that perfectly with the executives at Kodak,
who actually had the prototype for the digital camera.
They invented it.
But they were trapped in the shadow work of their own legacy thinking. They didn't do the deep reading of the market shifts. They just tried to protect their chemical film business, and they went bankrupt.
Which brings us to exercise 3, slaying the Google effect.
The Google effect is essentially digital amnesia. We don't bother remembering facts because we know we can just search for them in 3 seconds.
But Armour makes a really crucial point here. You cannot have an aha moment, a true creative synthesis, if the raw facts aren't actually stored inside your brain to connect with each other.
Creativity requires connection. The story of Joshua Foer illustrates this beautifully.
An average guy, a journalist, who decided to train his memory.
And after just 1 year of using ancient techniques like the memory palace, the method of loci, he actually won the U.S. Memory Championship.
The book also brings up the London taxi drivers.
They have to pass a test called the knowledge. It requires memorizing the entire labyrinthian map of London without relying on GPS. And brain scans actually show that their hippocampus, the memory center of the brain, physically grows larger than the average person's.
Proving that the brain is highly plastic. We really can't rebuild that concentration core. if we put in the reps.
We can, and honestly, we must. Because Armour's bottom line is chilling. If you cannot focus, you cannot choose. If your concentration is weak, you don't actively choose to read a book during your leisure time. The algorithm chooses for you to watch a short-form video. Focus is the absolute prerequisite for free will.
That is a very heavy realization.
Yeah.
So we've covered the leaks, the efficiency traps, and the mental training regimen. As we wrap up this deep dive, how do we pull this all together for you, the listener?
It all comes down to what Armour calls the final audit. You have to fundamentally view yourself as the CEO of a corporation called My Life.
That's your day job.
The day job is merely a subsidiary. Its only purpose is to fund the parent company. It is not the life itself.
That reframing changes absolutely everything about how you value your time. The technical world is not going to slow down. The pace is only going to increase. The update trap will be there tomorrow morning.
The only variable you actually control in this equation is your own mind. You can either be the harassed practitioner, constantly leaking your fortune in these tiny micro-withdrawals, or you can step back and claim the daily miracle.
The sub-1,440-minute vault opens again tomorrow morning.
It is entirely up to you how you spend it.
And here's a final thought for you to mull over as we close out. We've talked a lot about digital boundaries and mental firewalls, but consider the physical architecture of your actual home. Think about the room you spend the most time in. Is that physical space designed to foster your synthetic work? Or is it unknowingly optimized just to make your shadow work more comfortable? Because if your couch is built for scrolling and your desk faces a television, you might be losing the battle before you even open your laptop. Something to look at today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the great time delusion.
We'll see you next time.
Okay, so I want you to try a little thought experiment with me today. It's a classic, but stick with me because the stakes are actually pretty high.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment. Lay it on me.
Right. So imagine you wake up tomorrow morning, you roll over, you check your banking app, and there is a fresh deposit of exactly 1,440 units of currency.
Well, that is a very good morning. I'm liking this already.
It's the dream, right? But there's a catch. Because there's always a catch. The bank has some pretty terrifying rules. You cannot transfer this balance to savings. You can't invest it for next week. And here is the real kicker. Use it or lose it.
So zero rollover.
Exactly. If you don't spend every single unit by midnight, the bank just deletes it.
It's the ultimate depreciating asset.
And obviously, for anyone who hasn't guessed it yet, we aren't really talking about Bitcoin or dollars here. We're talking about the daily miracle, those 1,440 minutes we all get. Every single day.
Yeah, and it's interesting you call it a miracle because the book we're covering today argues that for most of us, those minutes aren't a miracle at all. They're actually a massive source of anxiety.
Which is why we're doing this deep dive into the great time delusion. Specifically, the subtitle really nails it. Field Manual for Control of the 24-Hour Day by Hamilton Armour.
And this is essentially part 2 of our deep dive into Armour's work. In the last session, the one we called Intro to Six, we really looked at the first half of the book. We talked a lot about defense.
Right, fighting back against shadow work.
Exactly. Those administrative tasks that corporations use to actually pay people to do, but now they've just quietly offloaded them onto us, scanning your own groceries, booking your own travel, managing your own healthcare portal.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And we also discussed technical friction and the concentration core, basically how to stop bleeding time. But today we pivot because Armour makes a really good point. If you clear the weeds but you don't plant a garden, the weeds just come right back.
That's the offense side of things. Once you've fought back and reclaimed what he calls your unallocated equity.
Which is those 8 hours that aren't sold to a boss or spent sleeping, right?
Spot on. Once you have that equity back, what do you actually do with it?
That is the critical question for today. Chapter 7 through 13 are all about inhabiting that time. So let's start with Chapter 7, where Armour talks about the atmosphere of the mind. He draws this very sharp line between the reactive mood and the reflective mood.
This is fundamental to his whole thesis. The reactive mood is just the default setting of the digital age. It's high-frequency scanning, you're constantly waiting for the next ping, the next crisis, the next dopamine hit. But he uses a grammatical analogy here that I found really, really helpful.
Yeah, I struggled with the grammar part at first, so walk me through it. He talks about cases.
He does. He says the reactive mood, where most of us live, is the accusative case. Grammatically, that means you are the direct object. Things are being done to you.
Okay.
The phone pings, you look. The email lands, you reply. You are the object of someone else's verb.
Which is just a terrible way to view your own life, like you're a pinball being smacked around by notifications all day.
It really is. You want to shift to the nominative case. You want to be the subject, the actor, the author of the experience. And Armour anchors this in a really powerful concept from Viktor Frankl, the neurologist and Holocaust survivor.
Right, the author of Man's Search for Meaning.
The very same. Frankl realized that everything can be taken from a human being except one thing: the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. He said there is a space, a gap, between the stimulus and the response.
See, I feel like that gap has been shrinking. In our modern era, the technology we use is literally designed to solder that gap completely shut. Stimulus notification, response swipe, there's no breath in between.
And that is the delusion in the title. We think we're multitasking or being productive, but we're just reflexively twitching. The goal of the reflective mood is to mechanically widen that gap, to pause, to act rather than react. But Armour suggests you can't just hope this happens, you actually have to engineer it.
And this brings us to the evening review, which honestly sounds a bit like a corporate performance review, but for your soul.
In a way, it kind of is. He cites Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, who would examine his entire day before sleeping, hiding nothing from himself. But Armour gives us some modern examples that are, well, let's say they're rigorous. Take Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great.
Okay, we have to talk about the spreadsheet. Because when I read this, my first reaction was, this guy needs to chill out. He tracks his creative hours and gives every single day a score from +2 to -2.
It sounds incredibly obsessive, doesn't it? Like he's trying to mathematically optimize joy.
It sounds like something a robot would do to understand human emotion. Beep boop, today was a +2.
I totally get that reaction, but think about the utility of it. Most of us rely on vibes to know if we're happy or productive. We just guess. Collins has hard data. He can look at that spreadsheet after 6 months and say, wait a minute, every time I have lunch with this specific colleague, I log a -2 day.
Oh, wow, so he can actually engineer a good life rather than just crossing his fingers and wishing for one.
Precisely. He spots the patterns that drain him. And then you have Ryan Holiday, who does the Stoic evening audit.
This one felt a bit more accessible to me. It's not a spreadsheet, it's just a set of questions.
Right, and the specific questions really matter. He asks things like, who did I spend time with? What did I learn? And what is the most important thing? It prevents what Armour calls cognitive residue.
Explain that term for us, cognitive residue.
It's the mental sludge you carry over from the day. If you had a highly stressful meeting at 4 in the afternoon and you don't process it, if you don't close the books on the day, you carry that stress right into your sleep and then into the next morning. You need a closing ceremony to definitively say, today is done.
So once we have the right atmosphere, we've widened the gap, we're reviewing our days, we have to fuel the machine. And this brings us to Chapter 8, Deep Reading. And I have to be honest here, this hit me hard because I am definitely guilty of the F pattern scan.
We all are. The Nielsen study that Armour cites is just devastating. It shows we don't really read online anymore. We hunt. We scan the top line, then a bit further down, then we just scroll the left side looking for keywords. We are decoding, not reading.
And the consequence isn't just that we miss a few details. Armour argues we're actually at risk of losing a specific part of our brain function.
We risk atrophying the reading circuit entirely. Marianne Wolf's research is central here. It's very much a use it or lose it situation. When we stop deep, linear reading, the kind where you stay with one complex argument for 300 pages, we lose cognitive empathy.
Connect those dots for me. How does reading a book help with empathy?
Because deep reading is the only time you are forced to simulate another person's consciousness for hours at a time. You are literally living inside the author's head. If you only read tweets or quick headlines, you're just reinforcing your own existing bias. You lose the capacity to imagine the other.
So if we stop reading complex books, we become more tribal as a society.
Inevitably, we become highly susceptible to demagoguery because we can't process complex, nuanced arguments. We just want the quick slogan.
So what's the solution? Because I can't just magically force myself to focus if my brain is broken.
Armour says reading has to become a context sport. Passive reading is dead. You need to use marginalia.
Writing in the book, which I have to say, I was raised to believe is a mortal sin. You do not write in books.
You really have to get over that. Armour brings up Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was apparently a terrible house guest. He would borrow his friends' books and return them completely covered in notes. And John Adams, too.
I love the John Adams anecdote. He wouldn't just underline things. He would literally argue with the author in the margins.
Yes. He'd be reading Rousseau's theories on freedom and just scribble, "This is not true." Or he'd write "foolish" right next to the text. That is active engagement. You aren't just consuming, you're collaborating. You're fighting with the material.
But practically speaking, for the listener who wants to try this today, what's the protocol?
Armour suggests two really good ones. First is Ryan Holiday's churn protocol. He reads a book, marks it up heavily, but then he waits a week.
He just lets it sit.
He lets it sit. Then he goes back through the book. If a passage still resonates a full week later, he transcribes it onto a physical index card. It filters out the noise.
And the second one was from Maria Popova.
Alternative indexing. She creates her own index in the blank pages at the back of the book. Instead of the standard index, she lists her own themes like grief or beautiful language or on writing and logs the page numbers as she reads. She essentially builds a map of the book that is custom to her own mind.
The challenge Armour sets for the reader is brutal, but so effective. He says, do not turn the page until you have underlined a connection to your life, a disagreement, or a summary. If the page is clean, your mind was likely dirty cluttered with distraction.
Exactly. It forces you to stay in the room with the author.
Okay, but here is where we hit a bit of a speed bump. We are optimizing our time, we are reading deep philosophy, we are auditing our days, and suddenly we run the risk of becoming completely insufferable.
Ah, yes. Chapter 11, The Trap of the Prig.
It's such a specific cutting word, prig. Armour warns that once you start living this day, within a day, you risk feeling morally superior to everyone who's just, watching reality TV.
It is a huge hazard. You start measuring your human worth by your productivity metrics. Armour calls this the mathematics of ego. You think, I read 50 pages of Stoicism this morning, therefore I am a better human than you.
And honestly, the modern wellness space is completely full of these people.
It absolutely is. And the solution Armour proposes is the protocol of silence.
Which is basically Fight Club rules.
First rule of the 16 hours, you do not talk about the 16 hours. Validation must be internal, not external. If you post your cold plunge and your journaling routine on social media for likes, you've missed the point entirely. You're just performing goodness.
He gives some cautionary tales here that are pretty cringy to read, like Brian Johnson, the blueprint billionaire.
A perfect example of optimizing yourself right out of humanity. He spends millions to have the biological markers of an 18-year-old. But he can't have dinner with friends because of his strict fasting window. He can't stay out late. He essentially built a perfect high-tech cage for himself.
And A.J. Jacobs, with his domestic insurgency, he tried to be the healthiest man alive, and it drove his wife absolutely crazy.
Because he imposed his friction on her. He was shushing people at parties to protect his hearing. Then there's Paul Miller, who spent a year totally offline to find himself and just ended up incredibly lonely, not some philosopher king. The takeaway is that the anti-prig realizes that the more they learn, the more they see their own ignorance. Real stature is quiet.
So we're quiet, we're humble. Now let's talk about what we actually produce with this time. This is chapters 9 and 10, and I love this pivot curiosity as a strategy.
This is crucial for the AI era we're entering. In a world where answers are cheap, you can ask a chatbot literally anything and get an answer in seconds, the real value shifts to the questions. And unique questions come from unique rabbit holes.
Armour argues that going down a rabbit hole, which we usually think of as a total waste of time, is actually a massive competitive advantage now.
It creates a unique fingerprint of knowledge. If you only learn what's on the syllabus or what's in your industry trade journal, you are running the exact same software as everyone else in your field.
The examples here really drive this home. We all know the Steve Jobs calligraphy story, but the one that stuck with me was Deja Taylor.
Oh, that is my favorite story in the entire book. She was 17 years old, and she got obsessed, just went down a massive rabbit hole about beet juice chemistry.
Beet juice, like the vegetable.
The root vegetable, not some high-tech engineering lab. She found that beet juice naturally changes color at a specific pH level around a pH of 9.
And why does that matter?
Because infected human wounds happen to have a pH of 9, so she invented smart sutures dyed with beet juice. They turn from bright red to dark purple when a wound gets infected.
That is just incredible, and it's so low-tech.
It costs pennies compared to electronic sensors, making it absolutely perfect for developing nations. That discovery didn't come from following a standard medical curriculum. It came from useless curiosity about a vegetable.
And what about Hedy Lamarr?
Another brilliant example. She was a famous Hollywood actress, but her rabbit hole was tinkering with player pianos, just messing around with how the paper rolls synchronized.
Right.
And that useless tinkering led her to co-invent frequency-hopping spread spectrum technology to stop torpedoes from being jammed during World War II, which is literally the foundational technology for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth we use today.
From player pianos. It really debunks the idea that you have to stay in your lane to make an impact. And then Kevin Systrom, too, studying that cheap plastic Holga camera in Florence, which directly led to the photo filters that made Instagram a billion-dollar company.
Absolutely. And this connects perfectly to Chapter 9, The Amateur's Renaissance. There is this intense pressure today to monetize everything we do. If you knit, you have to open an Etsy store. If you write, you need to start a Substack. Armour calls this the monetization fallacy.
Stop trying to turn your hobby into a side hustle.
Yes, please. Do what he calls synthetic work. Do things the hard way purely for mental stability. Look at John Clant, the primitive technology guy on YouTube.
The guy who goes into the woods and builds mud huts with a stick. 11 million subscribers just watching him work in total silence.
Or Nick Offerman, the actor. He does very serious woodworking. He doesn't need to sell tables to pay his rent. He does it because acting is abstract and weird and ephemeral. Woodworking is real. You can touch it. It grounds him. It's a physical antidote to the digital world.
So we have these activities, reading, rabbit holes, synthetic work, but how do we actually sustain them without burning out?
Yeah.
Because Chapter 12 talks about building the ecosystem.
The shift in metaphor is the key here. We need to stop trying to build a machine. Machines are inherently brittle. If one gear breaks, the entire machine stops. We need to build an ecosystem. Ecosystems are resilient.
He talks about plasticity. If your schedule breaks on a Tuesday, don't quit the whole system. Just resume on Wednesday.
Right. And find your keystone habit, the one single thing that holds the day together for you. For some, it's a morning startup routine. For others, like T.S. Eliot, it's the evening.
The historical examples of this day within a day are so inspiring to me because these people had normal, demanding jobs.
Right.
Like Anthony Trollope, he wrote for 3 hours every single morning.
Before going to his job at the post office, he actually invented the iconic red pillar box in Britain. He was a highly successful postal surveyor.
And Wallace Stevens, an insurance executive who composed complex poetry while walking to work.
And he didn't write a single word down until he got to the office. He used the physical rhythm of his daily commute to dictate the meter of the poems. It proves you don't have to quit your day job to do your life's work. The job actually funds the ecosystem.
Which leads us nicely to the final chapter, Chapter 13, The Infinite Game. This really feels like the philosophical peak of the whole manual.
It draws heavily on James Carse's concept. A finite game is played to win. You want the promotion, you want to hit the quarterly target, you want to beat the other team.
The resume stuff, basically.
Right, but an infinite game is played for the sole purpose of continuing the play. It's not about winning at all. It's about keeping the game going. It's about legacy.
Armour contrasts resume virtues with eulogy virtues. We spend 16 hours a day polishing the resume, the finite stuff. But the eulogy virtues, was he kind? Was she curious? Did they actually help people? That's what remains when the game is over.
Exactly. Look at Jimmy Carter. He lost the presidency, a massive finite defeat. But he won the infinite game through decades of quiet humanitarian service. He built what Armour calls the architecture of the afterlife.
Or Danny Hillis and the 10,000-year clock, a massive engineering project inside a mountain with zero commercial value, designed solely to force humanity into long-term thinking. But the ultimate example of this in the book isn't a success story at all. It's a profound tragedy, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.
That part of the book was just haunting.
It really was.
It was 1911. The owners of the factory were playing a strictly finite game. They wanted to minimize the theft of fabric scraps by the workers, so they locked the exit doors. They were maximizing short-term profit through inventory control.
And when the fire broke out, 146 workers died because those doors were chained shut.
A horrific finite loss. But look at the infinite ripple it caused. That tragedy shocked the entire system. It led to Francis Perkins, it led to the sweeping New York labor reforms, and eventually the national workplace safety laws that save millions of workers today.
The finite act of greed inadvertently created an infinite ripple of reform.
We never truly know the full extent of the ripples we create. And that brings us all the way back to your 4,440 minutes.
Because if you treat those minutes as just currency to be spent, just surviving to get through the day, you're playing the finite game.
Correct. But if you treat them as an ecosystem, if you use them to build deep relationships, to learn useless things like beet juice chemistry, to inhabit the reflective mood, you are playing the infinite game. You are actively building an architecture that outlasts you.
So here is our final thought for you to mull over today. We've talked a lot about mental architecture during this deep dive, but I want you to take a look at your physical architecture. Look at your living room right now.
Is it designed for the reflective mood? Or is all your furniture literally pointed at a glowing screen to make mindless consumption the path of least resistance?
Sometimes you actually have to rearrange the furniture to rearrange the mind. Don't just manage your time. Honor it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the great time delusion.
See you in the next one.